The good news is the U. S military has become very good at this. I think that there have been some circumstances where the military proceeds in steps and are continually re-evaluating whether, well, maybe this is a situation where we can. In fact, take the strike without a lot of civilian casualties. A good example with the recent trucks that were struck. There may be ways in which warnings can be given to the drivers. Many of whom may not work for ISIL, they may just be for hire or being forced into it so. That they better abandon those trucks before we shoot them down, because we're shooting them down. So that's the kind of conversation, and that's been ongoing throughout the process. With respect to immigration reform, I can't comment on the ins and outs of the legal case. I've said before and I'll say again, I am confident that the rules and executive action that I put forward are squarely within the category of prosecutorial discretion that historically has been under a president's power. And you've got lower courts who've disagreed, but we think that past precedent is on our side. Substantively, I've got 11 million people in our countries, many of whom are working, paying taxes. Our neighbors, co-workers, friends who've lived in the United States for a very long time. We're not going to deport them, despite what some political leaders may say. It would be contrary to who we are, would be too costly, is too impractical. What we want to do is allow them to get out of the shadows and to get right with the law. pay a fine, go to the back of the line, but hopefully, over time, be contributors to society. Of course, none of this would be necessary if we just passed the legislation that was passed in the Senate with a bipartisan majority. And I continue to believe that the ultimate solution is going to be one that comes from Congress. And although, during this political season, it may be difficult for Republican leaders in either the House or in the Senate to resuscitate that legislation, my hope is that after the election, they will. And in the interim, I'm going to do everything I can to sensibly apply our immigration laws. In a way that is reflective of the fact that we're a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants. And just very briefly, with respect to sex trafficking, this is a critical problem. We take it very seriously. We have entire divisions in our law enforcement agencies that are dedicated to this. I've elevated this within the White House so that we have people focusing specifically on ending trafficking. And in our international discussions most specifically. Out here in Southeast Asia we are working very closely to promote mechanisms that will end trafficking. In fact, TPP, one of the central mechanisms in TPP, to ensure high labor standards and human rights and human dignity. Are requirements among the members who are signatories to have in place real, serious, enforceable ways to prevent the kind of human trafficking that causes such hardship and brutality for so many people. And those of you who were with me when I visited the refugee center yesterday will recall the lovely Young 16-year-old who was sitting next to me, she's somebody who had been a victim of trafficking. And it reminds you of the terrible toll that is often placed on children. People who are the most vulnerable, people who are least able to protect themselves. And every country has an obligation to put an end to it. David Nakamura. Question, thank you, Mr. President. You said moments ago that Americans should not give in to fear when it comes to these terrorist attacks. But you also said that the person who may have been the person behind thinking about the attacks is not a mastermind, and that anybody who can get their hands on some conventional weapons can and is willing to die, can blow themselves up. How should Americans feel that if they shouldn't be scared? And if I may, the Washington Post and ABC News just this week came out with a poll that said "83% of the voting public believes that an attack, a terrorist attack against the US with mass casualties is likely to happen in the near future, and 40% say it's very likely." Does that in your mind, given the fact that you think the public should not be so fearful, mean that the terrorists are winning? And do you believe that this is sort of the new normal, and Americans will have to live with this kind of fear? President Obama, David, I think that the American people are right to be concerned. And to expect that we in the government and in law enforcement are doing everything we can to disrupt terrorist attacks. to intercept intelligence that may lead us to individuals who are willing to carry out these attacks. That we make sure that these terrorists are not gaining the kinds of weaponry that would make it easier for them to cause mass attacks. This is a serious problem. And as somebody who more often than I would like has met with or comforted families of victims of terrorism, the losses are real and they're devastating. So this is a serious problem. And we have to work collectively across the board. As we've been doing since I became president and since previous administrations identified the kinds of organized terrorist activity like Al-Qaeda that we've seen. We've got to do everything we can to stop it. But there is a difference between being vigilant and being concerned and taking this seriously and taking precautions and in some cases, changing our security arrangements, as we've done. For example, in aviation there's a difference between smart applications of law enforcement and military and intelligence, and succumbing to the kind of fear that leads us to abandon our values. To abandon how we live, to abandon or change how we treat each other. And the good news is, Americans actually have been resilient. They've been tested. We had a mass casualty attack on September 11th. And as I said before, I was very proud of the fact that the fundamental nature of America and how we treated each other did not change. I think we made some bad decisions subsequent to that attack, in part based on fear. And that's why we have to be cautious about it. We have to think things through. But overall, the American people went about their lives. Times Square is filled with people, rightly so. After the Boston bombing attack, folks went right back to the ballpark and sang. Take me out to the ball game. That's what they needed to do. And so the message I have is that those of us who are charged with protecting the American people are going to do everything we can to destroy this particular network. Once this network is destroyed, and it will be, there may be others that pop up in different parts of the world. And so we're going to have to continue to take seriously how we maintain the infrastructure that we've built to prevent this. But it doesn't have to change the fundamental trajectory of the American people. And that we should feel confident about. And the media needs to help in this. I just want to say, during the course of this week, a very difficult week, it is understandable that this has been a primary focus. But one of the things that has to happen is how we report on this has to maintain perspective. And not empower in any way these terrorist organizations or elevate them in ways that make it easier for them to recruit or make them stronger. They're a bunch of killers with good social media. And they are dangerous, and they've caused great hardship to people. But the overwhelming majority of people who go about their business every day, the Americans who are building things, and making things, and teaching, and saving lives as firefighters and as police officers. They're stronger. Our way of life is stronger. We have more to offer. We represent 99.9% of humanity. And that's why we should be confident that we'll win. Colleen McCain Nelson. Question, thank you, Mr. President. You've threatened to veto the bill the House passed that would tighten screening procedures for Syrian refugees. But you've left the door open to legislation that is more constructive in the White House's view. President Obama, yes. Question, what specific changes to your refugee program would you support? And do you think that Democrats who are calling for a halt to your program are betraying our country's values? As you've suggested of some Republicans. And one last thing, I'm sorry, separately. Not a four-part question. President Obama, just a two-parter. Okay, go ahead. Question, you met Friday with Prime Minister Najib. Who is facing allegations of corruption and human rights violations. And you'd said at your town hall event that you would raise those issues with him when you spoke privately. What was your message to Najib about the investments funds? Scandal, and also about the issue of jailing his political opponents? President Obama, okay. With respect to the refugee program, Paris just happened a week ago. News moves so fast these days that sometimes we just lose track. It's been so recent and so pervasive in the news, and people have, understandably, been so concerned given how similar Paris is to many American cities that I get why legislation in the House moved forward quickly.